Lookout Tower 239 by the Prowler. My name is Rick Rogers, and I am a park ranger stationed here at Lookout Tower 239 at Mount Charleston Forest and Wildlife Preserve. If you happen to come across this journal and not myself, then that means I didn't make it through my shift, and I was dragged off into the night. My shift started off like any other, slow and boring. I didn't receive my first call over the radio until about 2 hours into my shift, when I received a distress call from 2 campers that were camped on Rush Peak. I thought that was strange to begin with, because people aren't allowed to camp up there anymore. It's been closed off to the public since I've been a park ranger, and I've been a ranger going on 30 years now. God only knows how long it's been closed, because none of my colleagues were around the last time it was opened either. I asked what they were doing up there and got no response. They complained of hearing strange noises off in the surrounding woods near them, and said loud scratching on the outside of their tent is what woke them up. Now, the strange noises part is something I got a call about every shift, and it always was nothing. I swear people forget there are animals out in those woods, or that they're out in nature. Generally, there is going to be a sound or two that you typically don't hear in your everyday life. But that doesn't mean there's some nefarious madman or creature out there looking to kill you. But what stood out about this call was the scratching on the tent. That could turn out to be something serious. Now, there weren't bears in these woods, but it could have been a mountain lion. So I told them not to leave the tent, and I would be there as fast as I could. As they responded, the radio began to crackle and pop. Their voices melted into the static. It was quite eerie. I don't know how to explain it. I asked them to respond again, but it was still their eerie static voices that responded, but this time with what I believed to be old music playing in the background. 50s music, I believe. Then the radio went silent. The connection was lost. So I hurried and gathered my things, jumped in the Jeep, and headed out in their direction. I arrived at the location about 25 minutes later. I got out of the Jeep and grabbed my rifle. I walked up the hill and saw no trace of the campers. Till this point, I waved the flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing. I walked a little further up the hill and finally came across an old abandoned campsite. The tent was in tatters. The backpacks were ripped apart. The clothes were strewn all over the ground. But as I looked closer, the materials, the tent, the clothing, all looked to be from a different era. If I had to pick, the 50s. And another strange thing was, even though everything looked to have been decaying for decades, the fire pit still had some smoldering embers. I went through the backpacks, searching for clues. The clothing was ripped and musty. I came across some boxes of unused food, brands I've never heard of before. I checked the expiration date. My eyes widened. 1958, it read. But how could this be? I thought. An almost perfectly preserved campsite from the 50s? How was it still standing here? Where were the people who radioed me? And why didn't they see this while camping here? These were just some of the questions I had flowing through my mind. I then cordoned off the area and decided to head back to the watchtower. There was no sign of the campers, at least not the ones from this century anyway. I smirked as I thought that joke. But more questions began to gnaw at me on the way back. Like, what if that site did belong to the campers who called me? I know. Then that would open up a whole new door of paranormal questions that I did not want to get into at the moment. Also, whoever those campers were, what the hell was it that could have done all that damage? Thoughts for later, I suppose. I parked the Jeep and collected my things, then headed up the long winding stairs to the office in the lookout tower. I reported my findings to headquarters, who probably thought I was nuts after what I reported to them. Oh well, I know what I saw. I'm not crazy. I sat in my chair waiting for the next call to come, if there even would be one. This isn't the most bustling of jobs, you know. I leaned back in my chair, waiting and waiting. I fell asleep. I don't think I was out long when I was woken up by snapping and popping from the radio. I quickly sat up and leaned forward. The crackling static was almost deafening. I pressed the speak button and said, "Hello? Hello? Are you reading me? This is Ranger Rogers in Lookout Tower 239. Is anyone picking up this transmission?" Silence is all that answered me, with that eerie static, faintly, in the background. Just as I was about to change frequencies, I heard a voice. It sounded faint, almost in a whimper. Very hollow, very eerie. It kept saying,
"Help us. Why didn't you help us at the campsite? Why didn't you help us?"
"I was there, damn it. There was no sign of you. I searched and searched. Where are you?" I asked urgently.
"It's too late. He's coming. He's almost there."
The voice responded in a hollow, haunting voice. "What the hell are you talking about? Who's coming? Where are you?" I asked again frantically.
"It's too late for us. We're left to roam these woods, lost for eternity. But he's coming, and he's even closer now. Save yourself."
The ghostly voice replied. I shouted out loud, "Who's coming, damn it? Who are you talking about?" Just then the switchboard lit up. Every frequency was busy with a call, all warning he's coming. Who were all these people? I thought. Just then I heard a thump, and then another, then another. Slowly the footsteps made their way up the stairs, getting closer and closer to the hatch. Just then, the switchboard went black. All of the voices went silent, except for the one. "He's here," the ghostly voice said menacingly. The loud, thundering knock on the door rang out and shook the foundation. Then silence, frightening, deathly silence, permeated the air. I began to tremble. Then the most frightening, ghastly voice rang out.
"I'm here. Won't you let me come in?"
A Walk in the Woods. Anonymous author. The woods seemed to be alive. The dark seemed to breathe. every noise enhanced tenfold. Clara was terrified, exhausted, and cursing herself for getting off the trail. She had been walking for hours, the campsite nowhere to be found. I must have gotten turned around. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself for some measure of comfort. Tears flowed freely. This whole day started off well. She decided to walk in a part of the woods she had never been in. It was far too late when she realized she was lost. Branches and twigs kept snapping in every direction. She knew she wasn't alone. It's just an animal. Breathe. It will be okay. Clara said out loud, trying to squash the feeling of impending doom that was rising like hot bile in her throat. Gooseflesh rose on her pale skin. She picked up her pace. She was never good with directions, but she was sure she was moving north. At least she hoped. But hope drained as the hours went by. She came to a familiar-looking rock and came to the realization she had been walking in a circle for hours. She decided to move in the opposite direction. It was completely dark at this point, and Clara could barely see in front of her. She seemed to stumble over every rock and stick. A laugh that was so inhuman it was sickening, and a screech that made the blood run icy cold. Clara started running in full force. Then out of nowhere, she lost her footing, tripping and smacking her head on a rock. She was out instantly. When she came to, she knew she wasn't alone. She heard ragged breathing and smelled the stench of death. It was thick. She could almost taste it. She saw a black figure crawling on all fours. Long, straggly hair obscured its face. It was coming up fast on her. Clara screamed, managed to get to her feet. She was disoriented. She was able to run, so she kept going, her legs screaming and lungs burning. Survival, her only thought. Then she saw it, the outline of the edge of the woods. She could make out campfires lit in the distance. She was so close. She knew she could escape the grasp of this inhuman entity. She could feel it so very close. But Clara was fast. She had run track in college. Just 100 meters, her brain screamed. Finally, reaching the end of the trail, then she felt it. The being wrapped its claws around her ankle. Clara dropped face first to the forest floor, blood and streaming tears on her face. Clara screamed for a final time. Then she belonged to the creature. Don't follow the whistling. Author unknown. As a kid growing up in Louisiana, I spent a lot of time in the woods, hunting, fishing, just standard things. There's lots of legends and tales of these woods, a lot of which come from my grandfather. Once I got old enough to travel the woods alone, he started telling me of these legends. Petey Peepon was one of them. I was old enough to believe that the story of Petey Peepon was just something he made up to mess with me. It sounded pretty ridiculous after all. He told me if I ever heard a whistling out in the woods, not to follow it, or Petey Peepon would take me away. Standard ghost story stuff. Early one morning, Before the sun had risen, I was out in the woods. I was sitting on a log, waiting for the sun to come up so I could begin my squirrel hunt, listening for any sign of tree branches moving or acorns hitting the ground. It can be pretty peaceful. I used to live for those moments. The cool early morning air, the silence of the woods. It's a fantastic experience. Once the sun had come up, for me to see without the help of a light, I stood up and started to really survey the area, deciding on which direction I would go. I wasn't worried about staying close to the camp. At the time, I was 14, and my dad had instilled upon me basic survival instincts. I knew to keep in mind what direction the sun was to me when I started walking, and to put it to the opposite side when I returned, depending on the time of day, of course. I had never gotten lost by doing just that. After walking a good 5 miles, stopping to bag a few squirrels along the way, I came across a small clearing and decided to rest for a minute. The woods had gotten silent, so I guessed that since nothing was moving, it would be best to stop and wait for signs of squirrels. I first heard the whistle from my right. It wasn't a whistle someone does when they're trying to get your attention, more like someone whistling a song. What kind of idiot is walking around whistling when people are trying to hunt? I heard the whistling coming closer, and I could tell whoever this was coming right where I was sitting. Out in the woods, we don't like to yell at each other, so we just make this whooping noise. It's kind of the universal "I'm over here" signal. Whoop! I was hoping that whoever was coming my way would take the hint and either leave or stop whistling. At least whoop back to me. However, they did not. I couldn't hear them coming any closer, but they just kept whistling. I stand up from my log and look in the direction of the whistling. I couldn't see anyone there. Putting it off as someone who spent way too much on fancy camouflage, I decided to yell out, "Hey, I'm trying to hunt over here." Still, the whistling keeps going. Getting very irritated, I started walking towards the whistling so I could tell this idiot to shut up. I walked a good 500 yards and never saw anyone. I stopped to scratch my head and wonder if I was going crazy when I heard the whistling again, this time behind me. Now I'm thinking it's my cousin messing with me. He was next to me the night my grandfather was telling me about the things in the woods, and he knew my hunting spot. I walked back that direction saying, "Rhett, if that's you, I swear to God I'm gonna kill you." I wasn't worried about hunting anymore. I just wanted to know who was messing with me. I get back to where the clearing was, and it wasn't there. It's like the trees just magically grew back, and I was more confused than I had ever been in my life. Whistling from my right this time. At this point, I realize I have no idea where I am. Nothing looks right anymore. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that someone moved all the trees around when I walked away. By that time, I realized that I needed to get out of there. My stomach sank when I realized that, at this time, the sun was in the middle of the sky. I had no way of knowing which way to go. I felt confused and extremely lost. I could hear the whistling coming from behind me again. I started walking in the opposite direction of the whistling, hoping I could get away from whatever was causing it. I walked about 5 minutes when the whistling started coming from in front of me and was getting closer. I remembered I had a gun and stood my ground. I didn't see any other way of getting out of there. I saw only what I can describe as a blurry figure walking towards me. When I say blurry, I mean that it was like my eyes just refused to focus on whatever this thing was walking towards me. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, nothing helped. It was just a black, blurry blob in the form of a human. I fired at it and heard this horrible screech, something I can only describe as microphone feedback, but so loud I thought my eardrums were going to burst. I took off running and just didn't stop. I managed to find a deer trail and started following it. Things started to look familiar at that point, and I started seeing used shotgun shells on the ground. They looked like mine, and when I realized that, I remembered where I was. I followed the deer trail back to the camp, where my dad and grandpa was. When my dad saw me, he started screaming at me, asking where I was and why I hadn't came back to the camp. I asked him what he meant. I had only been gone a few hours, and why were they back so early? I never came back to the camp that night. I had been gone for almost a full day. I decided not to tell them about what happened, mostly because I knew there was no way my dad would believe me. I made up a story that I had gotten lost and just camped out in the woods that night. I wasn't allowed to hunt alone for a while. That night, as we're sitting around the fire, my dad left to answer nature's call, and my grandpa said, "You followed the whistling, didn't you?" Lost in the Woods, unknown author. Carrie realized now that she should have brought her camping gear on this trip, at least a fire starter or a tent or something. But no, she just had to try and Survivor Man this to prove to her sister that she was the superior camper. Only brought her knife, and now she was wandering through the freezing Alaskan wilderness as the sun slowly disappeared. After failing to find food, water, or even a way to make a shelter, she decided her best bet was to wander until she found a stream or a lake and catch a fish or 3. But to her dismay, none had appeared, and she now felt like she was dying from thirst. Then, Carrie saw a man walking towards her, dressed in hunting attire and waving his hand. Her first instinct was to run. Instead, she fainted. When she woke up, she was in what looked like a cozy hunting cabin. There was a fireplace going and an old wood stove with a pot of something boiling. There was a glass of water and some jerky on the bedside table, both of which she consumed gladly. She heard a knock at the door, and the man walked in. He took off his cap and smiled. He was about 6 feet tall and had long black hair and a large, scraggly gray beard and blue eyes. He had clearly been here for a while. She could see a ruggedly handsome face underneath all of the facial hair. "Here." He handed her a cup of coffee and a bowl of venison soup. "I'm Gabe," he said. "Carrie," she whispered back, eating her meal. "So, what brings you here, Miss Carrie?" "Stupid bet." "You wouldn't imagine how many times I've heard that." Gabe laughed. "But you should be more careful." "Oh." He yawned and opened up a newspaper. About 5 people have gone missing in just the past month. Bodies buried in the middle of the forest. Carrie felt a bad tingle going up her spine. How are they missing if their bodies were found? She let out a nervous chuckle. Oh, because I never told the police where they were, Gabe said matter-of-factly. Why not? Carrie felt around for her knife, but it was nowhere to be found. Why? Well, I was the one who made them missing. Gabe looked up from the newspaper. Why would I want the cops to find them? There is a bridge in the woods I wished I never crossed. Unknown author. Growing up where I did, there was always more to do in the woods than in town. We had one bowling alley and a few bars, but that was all. Most kids played in the forest, climbing trees, playing tag, or even hide and seek, with the understanding of potential hunting and wildlife dangers. And the bridge. The bridge stretched over a riverbank, but halfway through was a small gate with a sign telling us not to trespass. Me and the other kids always theorized about what might have been on the other side. One kid said they were doing construction. Another said it goes down a big hillside. Kids have been known to fall down. One night, I decided to take a new camera I got and told the gang I was going to sneak over the gate and see what was on the other side. And if I come back with a picture, they owe me $10 each. They all agreed, and I took my small flashlight and camera and made out into the dark woods. The dark wasn't a problem, however, seeing as I knew the forest like the back of my hand. After about 10 minutes of walking, I made my way to the bridge. It was amazing, as I felt like an explorer about to chart the uncharted and explore a whole new world. By the time I had got my courage together, I jumped over the gate and made my way to the other side of the bridge. As soon as I got to the other side, it became darker. It had gone from being pitch black to downright abyssal. My flashlight didn't light up much around me, and when I looked up, I saw the sky had gone from stars and moon to dark amethyst purple and crimson clouds. I was beginning to panic. I pulled out my camera and took a shot of the sky. Clear photo, surprisingly. I then ventured further down the path, knowing that the picture wasn't enough evidence to get my friends to part ways with their allowance. My flashlight stayed on the path, which was becoming less of a dirt road and more of an obscure pile of broken sticks and leaves. I shined my flashlight around me, and what I saw paralyzed me in fear. The trees had eyes. The base of the tree was as dark as the atmosphere and seemed to devour the light I shined on it. The eyes were the same as the sky, some amethyst, some crimson. I took lots of pictures. Forget the bet. I was going to sell this to scientists and explorers. At least that's what my dumb kid brain thought. When I got to a clearing in the woods, I ducked down into the thicket immediately. I saw people, humanoid figures in long robes with deep hoods. I couldn't make out the color because depending how the torches around them reflected the light, it was some variant of black, crimson, or purple. That's when I noticed the torchlights were green, like emeralds. I raised my camera and silently took some photos. The flash was eaten by the darkness, and the pictures came out blurry. They gathered around a monolith and began chanting as some light was pulled from the sky and channeled into the rock. The monolith had patterns on it, but they were ineffable runes. And finally, above the rock formation, a terrible darkness began to stir. The being of shadow bared an ethereal shape, with wings and horns of a ram. The only color that could be distinguished were the eyes, one violet and one crimson. I went to lift my camera, but upon seeing the thing, I dropped it and ran as fast as I could. I ran for what felt like a horrid amount of time before I saw the bridge, and with the last of my strength, I jumped it and then collapsed. I woke up in a hospital with my mother and father at my side. They told me my friends found me passed out from dehydration at the bridge. I was asleep for 2 days after my friends found me. I lost my camera, so my prize was forfeited. I honestly couldn't care less about the prize. I tried to tell them about what I saw over the gate, but they tell me it was just a bad dream. So, what prompted me to tell this story now, so many years after the ordeal? Because to this day, it has impacted me negatively. I have a phobia of the forest, mirrors, and the dark. I also do not look out my window at night, because the last time I did, I saw one of the hooded figures outside, waiting for me. The Thing in the Woods, author unknown. It must have been because of twists in the road. Yes, that's it. He ran ahead and I lost him for just a second. A second was long enough, I suppose. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Every night my brother and I go out on a run through the woods. He's faster than I am, so oftentimes I lose track of him as he rounds the bends in the trail. Last night, when I gained sight of him again, he ran off the trail and into the woods. Following suit, he led me on an unfamiliar route that went deeper and deeper into the woods. It was at around mile 2 that I started to suspect something was off. The first thing I noticed was his clothes. I could have sworn that his sweatshirt had lettering on the back. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized that something was very, very wrong. The only way to describe it was that his clothes weren't moving with his running, almost as if he was just one solid mass that had been painted over. It was at that point that my brother looked back and confirmed my suspicions. His hair, eyes, and face were all wrong. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't my brother. Heart pumping, I turned and sprinted all the way home. When I got home, my brother said he ran back once he saw I was missing, arriving 20 minutes earlier. Thinking about it now, that thing was probably trying to lure me into something horrible. But I don't want to know what would have happened if I had followed it. I got a text from my best friend who was missing for 8 years. Author unknown. So something very strange happened to me recently, and I don't know how to explain it. It all started back in 2007. I was in kindergarten, and I was not exactly the most sociable kid. Yeah, I was one of those lonely kids that didn't play with anyone else. From what I remember, and from what my parents have told me, I basically had no friends until I met Jordan. I don't remember how we met, but Jordan and I instantly became best friends. We visited each other's houses, had birthday parties, you name it. Fast forward 3 years later, I was sleeping over at Jordan's house, and Jordan suggested that we sneak out of the house and go into the woods in his neighborhood. In case you couldn't already tell, Jordan was the type of kid that would always do a bunch of stupid stuff. He would always convince me to do dangerous things with him, and then we'd both get in trouble for it. After all, we were only 9 at the time. I didn't want to go at first, but Jordan kept harassing me about it until I finally gave in and agreed to go with him. We crept downstairs and out the door, being careful not to make too much noise. We then ran down the street and into the woods. We sort of just hung out there for a while until Jordan and I both agreed we should go back to the house. However, we soon realized that we were lost. We both panicked and wondered how we were going to get back to civilization. Eventually, an old man came up to us and told us that he knew the way back. He looked to be at least 90 years old and had a long gray beard. Since we were young and panicked, we trusted him. The 3 of us walked for a long time, and I was beginning to have second thoughts about trusting this person. I whispered to Jordan that maybe we should just find our own way back. The man must have heard me because he grabbed both of us by the backs of our shirts and tried to drag us off. I was able to escape, but tragically, I can't say the same about my childhood friend. The next morning, I told Jordan's mom what happened, and the police were contacted. They searched the woods, but couldn't find the old man that matched my description. Eventually, Jordan's family lost hope and decided that he was probably dead. At first, I felt guilty because I was in the woods with Jordan at the time, but I eventually moved on and made new friends, since I was no longer as socially inept as I used to be. 8 years came and went, and I never heard about Jordan, although he was still in the back of my mind. That all changed last night. I was messing around on my phone late at night, which I usually do when I can't sleep. It was about 4 a.m., and I had to get up for school in 2 hours. Suddenly, my text tone went off. I wondered who could possibly be texting me at this ungodly hour. I checked the text, and it was from a random number with the same area code as me. I opened it and saw the words, "Hi, Matthew," on the screen. I had no idea who this person was or how they knew my name, so naturally I replied back, "Who is this?" I got a reply almost immediately. "Don't be silly, dude. It's me, Jordan." I dropped my phone on my bed, and a million thoughts went through my brain as I read it. At first, I thought that maybe one of my friends had a twisted sense of humor and was playing a prank on me. I decided to text my friend Catherine and see what she thought of it. Me: "Are you up?" Catherine: "I am now." "What the hell do you want? Do you know what time it is?" Me: "Some random number just texted me and said he was Jordan. He also somehow knew my name." Catherine: "I know that didn't actually happen. Now stop making crap up and go to sleep." I sent her screenshots of the conversation I had with a random number. Catherine told me to ask him things about myself, and he'd leave me alone. I asked him what class I had 4th hour, and I was horrified when I got a text that read, "English." I have no idea what to think. The only thing I can do is go to school tomorrow and see what happens. I got Catherine and Jordan to meet me at the front of the building in the morning. I'll update you guys on what happens. Lost almost a full hour of time in the woods. Had text to verify. Author unknown. Long-time lurker, first-time poster, and boy have I got a weird story for you. So there were these woods behind my neighborhood that I ran around in for years. They weren't like crazy big or anything, but they were big enough that you could have all kinds of cool adventures back there. Knew the place like the back of my hand. I knew where all the cool spots were, all that jazz. There was always this really eerie feeling back there, though, like something was following you or watching you. I don't know. It just wasn't very nice. So one day, I decided to show two of my friends this cool tree. It's pretty deep into the woods, but it was a nice early fall night. Weather was nice, all that stuff. So we start heading back there. It's a little later than I usually like to go exploring, but I figure we'll be fine. So we get there and start making our way to the tree. Typical eerie feeling, but nothing new. So after we trudge through some thick woods and shit, we get to the tree. It's cool, or whatever. We hang out for a bit. Then we smell something completely unnatural. It was like a mix of a rotting corpse and like something really sweet, but like sickening sweet. It was overbearing and really weird. So we look around to see if we can find the source, but we find nothing. No dead animals or anything. At this point, the eerie feeling is a lot stronger. You can definitely feel something watching you. Then I look over to my left and notice that where there's normally an impenetrable wall of trees and thorns and bushes and shit, there's a bunch of tall, soft grass. So I'm totally weirded out by this because, trees don't just disappear. Then, as I get closer, I notice that there is a fresh trail in the grass, like something dragged something through it. There's no blood or anything to make me think it may have just been a dead animal, though. The grass is just pressed down in a perfect trail in a spot that should be a wall of freaking trees and thorns. So, of course, we follow the trail, but not before sending a text to our other friend, who we are supposed to meet in about 30 minutes, telling him we're going to explore this creepy new trail and we may be late. So we follow this trail for a bit, and then I notice we are on top of one of my favorite hills. It has a great view of this stream that goes through the woods, and there's a couple houses and a decently busy road. So normally you can hear the stream, see the houses, and hear the cars on the road. Well, not tonight. There is no sound. You can't see the houses. No car noises or anything, which is weird, because the road is like maybe 100 yards from this hill. Everything feels off, like it isn't real, and all the colors are too dull, like everything had a gray filter on it or something. So we walk slowly around this hill, checking out how weird everything is before we get back to sort of the main entrance hallway thing. As we start making our way out, we all notice that some weird things are following us, like shadowy humanoid forms are walking around. But there's other things too. They're humanoid too, but they look emaciated, horribly pale, and completely naked and hairless. No sexual junk going on downtown or anything. Just creepy, white, hairless, fleshy bullshit. So these things are sort of darting from tree to tree, never really fully standing upright. They're almost always bent over at the waist, with their arms dangling off their torso, like they can't move them or something. It's really, really weird. Things shouldn't be as fast as they are. Luckily, they don't seem to want to really get close to us. So after staring at these things for a while, we start making our way out of the woods. It's been getting dark, but it isn't completely black yet. We always bring flashlights, though. So as we near the edge of the woods, we shine the flashlight down the hallway to see if we can see any of those things. Nothing. So we turned the flashlight off, and I shit you not, there is something standing there. Like pitch black form of a roughly 6-foot tall dude in a trench coat and a top hat. Cliche, I know, but that's what it looked like. We do it a few more times. It isn't there in the light, but it appears when you turn the light off. So we nope the F on out of there and start walking home. We get about 15 minutes down the street when we get a reply from our friend. 5 minutes after we sent the initial text. We all double, triple checked the times on the text. We could not believe it. The texts are marked on the map. There's no way that those could have been 5 minutes apart. I have no idea what happened that night. None of us have an explanation for it. I have lots of other stories from the woods and things that I'm assuming followed me home from them. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.